Hello. Today we're going to take a deep dive into Camille Saint-Saëns' choral tone poem, Calme des Nuits. This is Saint-Saëns. Doesn't he look like a nice chap? He worked mostly in 19th century Paris. As a young man, he was into adventurous modern music, which for him meant introducing his students to composers like Wagner. But as he got older, he earned a reputation for becoming increasingly conservative, both in his musical tastes and in his compositions. And this stood out against the dazzling creativity of the musical scene that surrounded him. His work eventually coexisted alongside really sparkling innovators like Debussy and Ravel. Meanwhile, Saint-Saëns earned a reputation for writing music that was technically fine, but his critics said lacked inspiration, lacked emotion, was kind of pedestrian. Now, to be honest, he didn't help himself when he wrote things like, quote, "Art is intended to create beauty and character. Feeling only comes afterwards, and art can very well do without it. In fact, it is very much better off when it does." End quote. That quote about art being better off without feeling strikes me as a touch incongruous when you actually listen to Saint-Saëns' own work. Here's a text for Calme des Nuits. Saint-Saëns didn't just write the music, he also wrote these words. Now, okay, it may not be a world-class poem, but it's a rather lovely sentiment, and the music may not have the creative spark of Debussy or Ravel, but I don't see how anyone could call it an emotion-free zone. It's beautifully written, and I think it's very emotionally effective. It's simple, but the music perfectly fits the words. And I think actually it could be argued that this song is all feeling. It really has very little interesting content at all beyond how it feels. Anyway, I'll get back to that at the end of the video. First, let's have a look at how to get the best out of it with your choir. Ah, this piece looks so simple to sing. Look at that score. Well, spoiler alert, in case you don't already realize, it's not. It's tough and it's potentially exhausting. And you can't really get away from that. It's just a fact about the physical experience of what's required to sing this piece. So your first job when you introduce the choir to it is not to find shortcuts, because honestly there aren't any. It's to show them what's needed and why it's worth it. I would definitely start to tackle this piece at the beginning of a rehearsal when voices are fresh and energy is high. Ask your singers to pick up their copies, but then explain that you'll be ignoring these copies for a few minutes during the warm-up. They'll find out why you're doing this shortly. And then you run them through a few exercises. The first one is something around controlled breathing. Use your favorite breathing exercise, whatever it happens to be. The breathing slowly in part is particularly important. Maybe get them to fill their lungs slowly, get their diaphragms working, keep their shoulders relaxed. Next, you want to work on the main skill needed to sing this piece, which is sustaining soft chords over long periods. So ask your singers to sing some simple clear chords at different dynamic levels. I think I'd use the same voicing as the opening chord of the piece, but not in D major. That's a bit high for sopranos to kick off with. Something like B flat is a better key. Start at mezzo piano, and then ask for piano, pianissimo, and so on. Let them discover just how quiet they can go and still keep a nice controlled sound. Use a fairly dark but open vowel like R or OR. And then finally, ask them to fade to silence as evenly as possible. That will take several attempts. They can learn from each previous one. Each time they're working on keeping an even and matched tone, not just among different singers, but also across the whole length of each chord. You want to get the sound as still and unchanging as you can. Here you can also add the idea of vowel stream. Change the vowels every 4 slow beats. You can start with the classic Italian vowels, and then you can add these two French ones, E and U, just for fun. Work on making the transitions very exactly on the bar lines. The mouth shape jumps instantly from one vowel to the next without any intervening movement. That's the idea anyway. And then add a consonant of your choice each time. The idea is to aim for a very smooth vowel stream here. It's interrupted momentarily every so often by precise consonants, but the vowels are the main thing. The consonants are just the inconvenient details we need to add to make sounds into words. Now, one point of these exercises, obviously, is to get singers using the skills they need to sing the piece well. But as with so many warm-ups, the other, even more important point is to get them in the right place, physically and mentally, for what follows. A few moments of slow, quiet breathing, a few moments of slow, quiet, tuned chords on different vowels. These things will center people, get them listening closely, make their breathing controlled, slow down their heart rate. It's all good stuff. Then, singers can look at their copies. Now, don't break the spell here. If you hadn't told them to have their copies ready from the start, at this point everyone would start shuffling papers, moving chairs, reaching into their bags, chatting, and all that careful work in creating the right atmosphere would go out the window. But this way, all they have to do is look down, so they stay focused. I think I probably start at the beginning of a piece less than half the time when I'm teaching it. But here I would start at the beginning. It's logical. Almost everything Saint-Saëns has to offer in this piece is contained in the first phrase. Oh, yeah, and by the way, about that first phrase, which edition do you have? Does it start with the basses leading and then a full chord all in one go? Or does it build the chord up gradually? I'm not sure which one is more correct, actually. I've seen a copy of the first edition from 1883, which has just the full chord. But then quite a few subsequent versions have the spread chord, so maybe Saint-Saëns changed his mind later, who knows. Anyway, either way, you start with the basses. Ask them to sing just their first note and then hold it in intensity, in vowel, in tone. The aim is for as soft and uniform and secure a sound as possible. When they can do it for their first note, then they can do it for their first three words, the first phrase. Once the basses are there, you can do it with each other part in turn. And I think here, everyone waits for everyone else. Everyone listens to what's involved. Sopranos might need particular attention because their D is higher in the register than the rest. Tuning of their C sharp coming down is also vital to keep everything else in tune. And that's important to fix now if there's any issue. Once these first few notes start to sound good, then honestly, you've done 75% of the work of the whole piece already. It's basically just that: even sound, matched vowels, good breathing. So then you can let them sing on. Start at bar 1, go through to the end, or however far they get before they need your help. Here's another idea. You might ask them to sing the whole piece the first time without consonants at all. This has at least 3 benefits. 1, it helps them focus on the vowels, and importantly on those vowel changes, making them very exact. 2, it requires really careful listening and counting, because without consonants, singers lose the most obvious audible signpost about where the beat is. And 3, if they're not that great at reading French, makes it a bit easier. This third section is called note bashing, but I'm tempted to say, what note bashing? The intervals aren't difficult, the rhythms are incredibly easy, and it all happens in such slow motion that singers have loads of time to think about what's coming. There are a few bits worth thinking about. Tuning might be a challenge with long, quiet chords. Watch out for the leading note, especially when descending. We already mentioned this with sopranos. The difference between a tonic and the leading note here should be tiny, much smaller than it would be on the piano, more of which in a moment. Intonation is also important on repeated, quiet notes. Basses hold the key here. If they can keep a low, quiet D or C or B flat in tune over a whole phrase, then the rest of the choir will find it much easier. Ask them to mentally reset the tuning every time they repeat the note. A nicely tuned bass section will really help sopranos stay bright when they're singing repeated high notes, such as Grand Silence. So, of course, will good breath support in the sopranos. Other challenges for pitching? I suppose the alto line and the bass line here are a little bit weird, bars 41 to 43. And there's some slightly unexpected bass sequences on Vous Charmez. This is almost the same as the previous one, actually, and Le Bruit. These are all much easier in context, so rehearse them sure, but ask other parts to hum so they can hear how they fit tonality. None of the chords is particularly weird, because it's Saint-Saëns. It all makes auditory sense, so these strange lines actually slot in quite nicely. One other thing, if you are confident enough as a conductor, consider not using the piano at all when you teach this piece. You probably know that pianos, which use equal temperament, are not tuned quite the same way as voices would be. And intonation, that is, fine details of tuning, is everything in this piece. So using the piano to teach harmonies actually risks unsettling the tuning a bit. It's a subtle thing, and perhaps your singers won't know exactly why it's happening, but they might just wonder why it's not staying quite in tune. Plus, it's always a good exercise for a choral conductor to close the piano lid and just work with voices. I do it often because I'm not a very good pianist. You may not need that excuse, but give it a go anyway. Okay, let's talk about pronunciation. This is always good fun when English choirs sing French. Vowels first. I won't say French doesn't have diphthongs, because it definitely does, and some of them are fearsome, but it doesn't have them where English speakers expect. The particular sound to watch out for in this piece is the various meaning of the letter E. So you've got éclat, you've got charmer, but then you've got poète, and you've got profonde, futile. None of these are diphthongs. That is, none of them are the English A. Also, if you have second language French speakers in your choir, they might want to make authentic French noises like nasalized vowels and the R at the back of the throat. But ask them not to. These are things European French speakers do when they speak, but not when they sing. When French people sing, R's are rolled or tapped or sometimes silent, and nasal vowels are, to use the delightful technical term, denasalized. In theory, that should make sung French a bit easier to handle than spoken French, at least for English speakers. But my experience is that people who know a bit of French try to add in too much of the stuff they learned in school. There's a recording on Spotify by a Parisian chamber choir, so if anyone challenges you, you can prove your point. I'll put the link in the description. Now, even though I live in a French-speaking country, I've still never quite got the hang of when you pronounce consonants between vowels and when you don't. So the following information was obtained through that foolproof method of listening to the French choir again. It's éhonté with no t. But it's plaisento with the t. I have no idea why. Word painting. Let's have a nice bright on l'éclat du soleil. It means the brightness of the sun. It's a sudden, vibrant contrast with all the rest of the piece. I'll play an audio clip, but actually I haven't found a recording that does it quite the way I'd like it. Yeah, you could have more energy than that. Oh, by the way, in this phrase, there's also one of those dangerous bass octave leaps. They're singing forte, and they leap up, and it's the Zadok effect. Don't let it stick out too much. Then let's be really dark on profonde. It's a glorious thing to sing. Darker than it would be in English, and the notes are all low in the voice too, especially for tenors and basses. So it really does have the effect of swirling darkness. Okay, now we get into some really interesting stuff. When you're thinking about performance and audience experience for this piece, you have some choices to make. First, it's important to realize that what will be a challenge for you depends a bit on the size of your choir. For a large choir, it'll be tough to create the intimacy that the piece needs. It's chamber music, the scope is extremely small, and the music and the text are both very intimate. So a large group of singers will need to work hard to constrain that scope to keep it feeling small, and that can be tiring. Meanwhile, for a small choir, the main challenge is a different one. It's a technical one: stamina. Can they sustain these long, slow phrases very still without shifting, wobbling, or running out of breath? And can they do it with their vowels perfectly matched? Therefore, let's talk about the elephant in the room: tempo, or more specifically, stillness. My printed score of this piece is marked 72 beats a minute. I think that's probably editorial because most other editions don't have a metronome mark. But still, Saint-Saëns definitely wrote molto adagio, and at the risk of stating the obvious, that is slow. And honestly, it's ambitious for a small choir. The most widely available recording online is one by the King's Singers. They're only 6 voices. And of course, it sounds stunning. There's not a single audible breath. Their tone is super smooth and controlled. How? Well, firstly, there is a lot of post-production on that recording. But secondly, more important for our purposes, they sing at about 100 beats a minute. Listen. I'm sorry, it sounds lovely, but I don't call that molto adagio. But I can totally see why they do it. With a group that small, you don't have capacity for staggering breathing, and a tiny wobble by one singer will be really audible. Not that the King singers ever wobble. But you have to move it along, or it's fragile, that's my point. And the price you pay then is that it ceases to be a meditative composition about stillness, and it becomes a more routine piece where the listener has to look for musical interest in the melody and the harmonies. And with all due respect to Saint-Saëns, frankly, I don't think it's those elements which are the most interesting in this piece. Melody, harmony, rhythm, they're all pretty unremarkable. I don't mean that as a criticism, really, because I don't think the piece is about those things. I think the magic of the piece is in its stillness, not in its musical details. The words are about how magical the night is, and literally because nothing happens at night. The whole point is that the poet doesn't need activity to be inspired. The poet can be inspired just by stillness. And the music plays out that sentiment perfectly. It's not just about the tempo either. It's also about the rate of harmonic change. Here, Grand Silence des Antres is all on one chord. It rearranges itself halfway through, but it's still just C major. That means no harmonic progress at all for, what, 15 seconds or so? That's a really long time in music. I love it, but it takes stamina and it takes no small amount of courage. All these long phrases need, very obviously, lots of preparation. So you can lengthen rests as long as you like, especially when one long phrase follows straight after another. Your singers need time to breathe and recharge. Let the audience wait. Oh, that first note is so long. And so is this one. And so is this one. We already talked about what singers need for these notes, but now think about the audience experience at moments like that. What do you want people to think and to feel when nothing is changing in front of them for several long seconds? Maybe the answer is nothing. They should just be able to sit and experience the music without commentary. Well, that means singers don't need to project. They can focus the sound right in front of them or right in front of you and not out to the audience. But also, keeping it so still is an expressive challenge as well. It's normal to want to shape and color long phrases, long notes, things like profonde and tranquille. You have to do it a bit, I suppose, but if you overdo it, you risk breaking the spell. I honestly think that half the challenge of this piece is to avoid drawing attention to any of its details, to let the audience experience it almost without noticing them. Channel your inner Zen. Performance acoustics will matter too, here more than most. A nice immediate acoustic like a small room or hall will do you a lot of favors because singers will hear their own sound and feel like they can control it. A more expansive acoustic will sound amazingly immersive to the audience with this piece, but it might make the choir's experience a bit more challenging because singers will feel like they're singing alone on the quiet parts, and in this piece that's nearly everything. I guess, anyway, there's not a lot you can do about this except warn singers. And if your rehearsal space is very different, I guess try to arrange 1 or 2 rehearsals in the performance venue. Nothing will kill a fragile piece like this on the night more easily than singers suddenly realizing when they open their mouths that the sound they're making is unfamiliar. Secondly, and this is a genuine consideration, will the venue be quiet? Will there be passing sirens, traffic noise? Will people be drawn to notice each other's coughing, the ceiling fans, the creaking of the chairs? Okay, this is not John Cage, but still, if you're stuck with a noisy city centre church, maybe give this piece a miss. Some conducting notes from my own experience. Be clear, what they really need from you is a clear beat, because they'll be pacing their breath very exactly. Don't ever lose eye contact. If that means memorizing the piece, then so much the better. And also, while we're talking about focus, this piece is an absolute death trap for minor slips of concentration. If someone messes up, wrong consonant, wrong vowel, singing in a gap, changing note too early, whatever, do not react. There's nothing for you to do, nothing for you to correct, because they will instantly know. So don't look, don't frown, don't grin, don't do anything. If it wobbles, your sole job is to gloss over it and resume normal service immediately. Conversely, because this is such a hard thing, know that your singers will be apprehensive about it, and the idea of enjoying it might be a bit far from their minds. So when you can, throw them a bone. When there's a moment of relieved pressure, like the loud passage, or when it's settled into the last few chords, give them a nice warm smile so they know things are going okay. If they think you're nervous, they'll be nervous. If they think you're happy, they'll be happy. However, note that rests between phrases are not good places to relax and smile. Rests in this piece are not moments of relieved pressure, they are focal points and breathing points. Allow singers to relax here at your peril. And one last idea. Why not enjoy the silence after the last chord? Keep your arms in the air for longer than it feels like you should, daring the audience to clap. They won't as long as you don't let them. But also warn the singers about this trick too, so they don't relax too early. The atmosphere you've created will be deflated immediately if your singers visually or even verbally go phew as soon as the last note ends. If you're really lucky, just before you release the tension at the end and the audience claps, someone on the front row will whisper, "Wow." And that's why you do this job. I hope you found this deep dive into Calme des Nuits useful. My name is Toby Wardman, and you'll find I have a little collection of these deep dives for conductors, each one about a different piece, obviously. If you're watching this video on YouTube, then you know the drill. Like, subscribe, comment, blah, blah, blah. Also, you should know there is a podcast version which might suit you better. Find it wherever you find your podcasts. Meanwhile, if you're already a podcast listener, then great, and thank you. You can see the video that goes along with this audio on YouTube, and that includes snippets from the score, so you can figure out what on earth I'm talking about. Okay, that's all from me for now. Bye.